Good afternoon. You're watching the English newscast on Future Television. I'm Linda Samim, and these are today's top stories. Speaking at a ceremony commemorating the death of his father, the late Prime Minister Rafiq Hariri, Future Movement leader Saad Hariri says Lebanon is in need of a national strategy to fight terrorism. Top anti-Houthi Yemeni officials called on neighboring Gulf countries to intervene to solve the crisis in their country. And the Ukrainian government and pro-Russian rebels exchanged accusations of fresh attacks only hours into the ceasefire agreed by them. Thousands of Lebanese gathered in Beirut on Saturday to mark the 10-year anniversary of the assassination of late Prime Minister Rafiq Hariri. Mourners gathered at the location where Rafiq al-Hariri was assassinated to light a flame and pay tribute. Several thousand people, including Lebanese and foreign officials, attended a ceremony held in Biel on Beirut's waterfront. Hariri's son Saad, Lebanon's most influential Sunni politician who is backed by Saudi Arabia, addressed the audience with a speech about the legacy of his father. Saad also condemns Assad, whom he blames for his father's death, saying he had destroyed Syria and caused the suffering and displacement of millions of Syrians. He criticized Hezbollah for its involvement in the Syrian conflict and said he will not allow the group to drag Lebanon further into the civil war next door. But he also backed talks between his Future Movement and Iran-backed Hezbollah that started in January to contain tensions in Lebanon that have been exacerbated by Syria's conflict. The former prime minister arrived in Lebanon from the Saudi capital of Riyadh in a surprise visit to attend the ceremony in honor of his father's assassination. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry has released a video message commemorating the 10th anniversary of Rafiq Hariri's assassination. Have a listen.
Prime Minister Rafiq Hariri, known to many as Mr. Lebanon, was guided by his vision of a stable, sovereign, and prosperous homeland. And for years, he gave hope to Lebanon's youth through scholarship programs that helped to educate generations, even during his country's darkest days. He stood for peaceful change and the resolution of differences through conversations, not carnage. He spent his life working to make Lebanon more democratic, more free, more prosperous, and more secure for all of its people. 10 years ago today, he was assassinated because some feared he might succeed. Still today, justice for that crime has not been served, and the United States stands with the Lebanese people and the international community in supporting the Special Tribunal for Lebanon and demanding that the murderers of Rafiq Hariri be held accountable. We also recognize the need to focus not only on justice for the cowardly crimes of the past, but on Lebanon's future, on honoring the legacy that Hariri left behind. On behalf of President Barack Obama, I can tell you that America's commitment to Lebanon remains as strong as ever. We continue to support in very practical ways Lebanon's full sovereignty and independence from outside influence, including through our support for the relevant UN Security Council resolutions, the Babda Declaration, and Lebanon's disassociation policy from foreign conflicts. And we continue to support Lebanon's efforts to strengthen its political and security institutions as a safeguard against violence, whether from outside or inside the country. No challenge is more perilous to Lebanon's security than the rise of violent extremism throughout the region. We are committed to helping the Lebanese armed forces meet this challenge because they alone have the legitimacy to defend their country's borders and protect their citizens. Make no mistake, there is no justification for the retention of arms by a militia or terrorist group that answers not to the Lebanese people, but to foreign governments in Damascus and Tehran. Between the spillover of extremist violence from Syria, the refugee crisis created by that conflict, and the economic difficulties that exacerbate every other test Lebanon is facing, it's fair to say that the status quo is not the Lebanon that Prime Minister Hariri envisioned. And while finally moving forward with the election of a Lebanese president will not fully resolve these challenges, it will be an essential step in the right direction. I urge Lebanon's leaders not to look outside of their country for a resolution to the presidential gridlock, but instead find a solution from within. Unless and until a president is chosen, the erosion of Lebanon's political institutions will only become more pronounced. As Lebanon seeks to fulfill its potential, as it seeks to continue Hariri's work toward a better future, the United States will stand right by its side. We will continue to work with political leaders, activists, scholars, and public servants throughout the country who share Hariri's vision for a sovereign, secure, and prosperous Lebanon. And we will be guided by the clear understanding that the answers to the challenges facing Lebanon today lie just as they did 10 years ago, not in violence and extremism, but in moderation and coexistence.
The Lebanese army has arrested 33 people overnight, confiscating stolen items and drugs as part of the ongoing crackdown on outlaws in the villages of northeast Lebanon. In a statement released overnight, the military said 9 automobiles and 26 motorcycles were also confiscated due to a lack of legal papers, in addition to an unidentified quantity of drugs, military equipment, light weapons, and ammunition. Saturday night was the third day of raids in a joint army, internal security forces, and general security plan to restore the rule of law in the largely abandoned eastern area. The ISF has also announced that it had confiscated 2 stolen cars and arrested 4 suspects over crimes related to theft, money forgery, and weapons trade. 103 suspects in total have been apprehended since the launching of the security operation on Thursday. Lebanese forces leader Samir Jaja says Hezbollah and ISIS are two sides of the same coin and criticized Iran for spreading Islamism and preventing his election as president. Jaja slammed Iran for being one of the largest symbols of political Islam, blaming the country for the rise of Islamism and emergence of ISIS and other extremist groups. The Maronite leader also criticized Iran for working against his presidential candidacy. He said Iran did not want him to become president, as that would weaken the country's influence in Lebanon. Jaja, on the other hand, praised Saudi Arabia for its constructive role in Lebanon, saying the kingdom's only goal is to protect Lebanon and political institutions, economy, and stability. He said the Gulf country does not interfere in Lebanese politics, especially in the presidential elections matter, despite the help it provides to the country. South Lebanon's fishermen have rejoiced after they came back to shore with nets full of valuable fish, some of which made their way into the Mediterranean Sea from Israeli fish farms. The fishermen caught more than 1,000 kilograms of fish known in Lebanese Arabic as ejaj in the southern Lebanese waters. The valuable fish is only found in artificial fish farms along the Israeli and Turkish coasts. Amazed by the large catch, fish vendors took advantage of the 5-day lull in fish supply to demand high prices, especially for the rare ejaj. Every ratel, a box carrying around 3 kilograms of ejaj, was priced at 40,000 Lebanese pounds before being reduced to 30,000 Lebanese pounds due to purchasers' discontent. Moving on to Syria, intense clashes in the south of the country have killed scores of pro-government and insurgent fighters in the past week, forecasting even fiercer violence as the weather clears. Syria's army and allied combatants from Hezbollah launched a large-scale offensive in the region last week against insurgent groups, including Al-Qaeda's Syria wing, Nusra Front, and non-jihadi rebels. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights says more than 50 rebels have been killed in the fighting, and 43 members of the Syrian army and allied group had also died. And coming up next, Michel Ferrero, Italy's richest man and the owner of global chocolate and confectionery empire, passes away. Stay tuned. Welcome back. A top-level meeting of Yemeni officials to discuss the country's political crisis has called on neighboring Gulf countries to intervene in the country. The lawmakers from the dissolved parliament and politicians met in Aden and agreed to move the capital there from Houthi-controlled Sana'a. The Houthi rebels seized control of the country a few days earlier after dissolving the legislature. The meeting today was reportedly delayed for several hours after explosive devices were found at the location. The gathering was held to unify efforts against the Houthi rebels and the coup carried out by them. Meanwhile, the UN Security Council is due to adopt a resolution urging the Shia rebels to step down, release government officials, and negotiate. At least 9 countries, including the United States, have closed their embassies in Yemen in the past few days. A Jordanian security court has sentenced a senior Muslim Brotherhood leader to 1 year and 6 months in prison for criticizing the United Arab Emirates on social media. The court found politician Zaki Bani Rushaid guilty of souring ties with a foreign country. Rushaid, the deputy head of the Muslim Brotherhood in Jordan, had criticized the UAE for designating the pan-Islamic movement as a terrorist group. Rushaid was arrested in November after writing that the UAE's rulers lack popular legitimacy and served Israeli interests by playing a leading role in a crackdown on political Islam. Moving on to Europe, Danish police have shot and killed a man they believe carried out 2 gun attacks, which left 2 people dead in the capital. At a press conference, police said video surveillance indicated the man was behind attacks on a free speech event on Saturday in Copenhagen's main synagogue early this morning. Officials say the man was shot dead this morning after opening fire on police, but no officers were wounded. The exchange of fire took place in the multicultural inner-city neighborhood of Norebro, where police had been keeping an address under observation earlier in the day. Police said there was no evidence to indicate that any more suspects were involved in the incident. The Ukrainian government and pro-Russian rebels have exchanged accusations of fresh attacks only hours into the ceasefire agreed by them. The ceasefire is seen as the first step in a peace plan aimed at ending 10 months of conflict in eastern Ukraine. Within 2 hours into the ceasefire, which came into effect on Saturday at midnight local time, Kiev reported attacks by pro-Russian separatists in the Luhansk area. A pro-Kiev official said 2 civilians were killed by rockets fired by rebels shortly after the start of the ceasefire, but most of the front line had fallen silent. Meanwhile, rebels accused the Ukrainians of deploying artillery shortly after midnight. Anxiety remains high that the unrest could be sparked anew by rival claims to Debaltseve, a strategic railway hub now controlled by the government. On Saturday, intense fighting persisted around Debaltseve in the eastern part of Ukraine, which has been besieged by separatist forces. Michele Ferrero, Italy's richest man and the owner of the global chocolate and confectionery empire, has passed away at the age of 89. His death is likely to spur talk on succession and potential tie-ups at the family-controlled Ferrero Group, which has continued to grow even through Italy's longest recession since World War II. The group, which makes chocolate hazelnut Nutella spread, Ferrero Rocher pralines, and chocolate Kinder eggs, is seen by analysts and bankers as Italy's most valuable privately owned company. The billionaire reportedly died at his home in Monte Carlo after battling a long illness. This marks the end of our bulletin for today. Now for a reminder of our top stories. Speaking at a ceremony commemorating the death of his father, the late Prime Minister Rafiq Hariri, Future Movement leader Saad Hariri says Lebanon is in need of a national strategy to fight terrorism. Top anti-Houthi Yemeni officials call on neighboring Gulf countries to intervene to solve the crisis in their country. And the Ukrainian government and pro-Russian rebels exchanged accusations of fresh attacks only hours into the ceasefire agreed by them. Those were your Sunday headlines from us here at Future Television. I'm Linda Tamim, wishing you all a very nice evening.